What is Table A Item 3 for an Alta survey or a land title survey? Why would you check it? What do I need to do as a land surveyor if you do check it? We're going to answer all those questions in this video. So Table A Item 3 is about flood zones, right? So I'm going to just read it to you right out of the spec. Table A Item 3 says, flood zone classification with proper annotation based on federal insurance rate maps or the state or local equivalent, depicted by scaled map location and graphic plotting only. What the heck does that mean? Okay, well, we're going to explain it. All right, so first we want to answer these three questions. Why is this on the spec? Like, why do they even put it in Table A to begin with? Why do we care about floods? What do I have to do as a land surveyor to meet the requirements of the spec? Okay, how do I show on my map that I've met the requirements of the spec if you check that Table A item? Okay, so we'll answer those three questions, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of that funky language that's in the actual Table A item so you guys understand what it is. All right, so why is it in Table A? Why do people care about floods? Well, floods are really important in real estate, especially if you're in an area like me in Central California. We have a serious flood hazards here in the valley. You know, we got the California coast. We got rivers up in the Sierra Nevada, so flooding is an issue anywhere you work in Central California. So look, floods can cause a huge amount of property damage. Floods can disrupt your business operations. You know, usually we're doing Altas for commercial property. Flood risk can impact the cost to insure a piece of property or the buildings on that property. Flood risk can impact your ability to develop a piece of property. And so for all those reasons, floods are really important in real estate. And so that's why they give you the option to find out about floods on your Alta survey in Table A, item number 3. So usually it is not the title insurance company that cares about this. So that's part of what makes this Table A item a little bit unique, is the requirement to check Table A is usually not being driven by the title company. So it's usually the client that cares or the lender that cares. So this is really a due diligence item that's typically being done by the buyer. It's the buyer that wants to know, or the buyer's bank that wants to know, hey, is this property in a flood hazard, in a flood zone? What's the flood hazard like, and how's that going to impact what I want to potentially do with the property? So I will tell you, this isn't this isn't a Table A item that gets checked a ton. I'd say it's about 50-50, and I think a lot of times it's because the buyer doesn't really care. They're just trying to get their loan approved, and the title insurance company doesn't care either. And so if the bank's not worried about a flood, then they're not gonna check Table A item 3, and nobody else is gonna care either. But we do sometimes, about 50% of the time, somebody will check item 3. Okay, so if you check item 3 on Table A, what do I have to do as a land surveyor? I got to do 2 things for sure. And there's 2 things I might have to do depending on what I find. Okay, so the first thing I have to do if you check Table A item 3 is I got to pull the flood map. Okay, so I pull the FEMA flood map, and I'm going to try and find out, are you in a flood zone? Yes or no? If you're in a flood zone, what type of zone is it? There's different types of zones. Okay, so that's the first thing I have to do. So I got to pull the flood map, and so then I got to review it, and I got to make a determination. Okay, now it's not always clear. It's not always cut and dry, right? So there's different types of zones. The boundaries of the flood zones aren't always super clear on the map. There's a lot of different things that come into play there. That's why they have a licensed land surveyor looking at it, right? Because they want somebody that has some experience making that determination. So I will interpret the map and try and make a determination on if you're in a zone or not and what type of zone. Now, there's a couple things that I could have to do beyond that, depending on what I find. So if I find that you're in a zone or you're close to a zone, but it's somewhat ambiguous, or there's some confusion, then I may have to go pull the actual flood insurance study. That's the study that the engineers do to determine the type and location of the zone, okay, on a particular map, the different zones on a map. So I may have to go actually pull the flood insurance study so I can understand how they drew the flood maps on the map, the flood zones on the map, okay? We don't do that all the times. In a cut and dry case, we may not need to do that, but I'd say about 50% of the time we're actually going in to pull the flood insurance study so we can read the study, okay? So the second thing that I might have to do is if I pull the map or the flood insurance study and I determine that your parcel, the zone boundary doesn't completely envelop your parcel. In other words, if your parcel is partially in and partially out of the zone, then I try and plot the actual flood zone boundary on your parcel. Okay, and again, not always easy, not always super clear, but we do our best. So if you're not all the way in or out of the zone, I'll have to try and determine where the flood zone boundary actually is on the parcel. Okay, now, how do I show you that I've met the requirements of the spec if you've checked item 3 after I've done that research? Okay, I do a couple things. Number one is I always prepare a note. So if you check Table A item 3, there will always be a note on our survey under the Table A item notes. And we are always going to tell you the same basic set of information in that note. So we're going to tell you what date we pulled the flood map from FEMA. We're going to tell you what flood map we pulled. They all have unique identification numbers. We're going to tell you if your parcel is in or out of a zone. And then we will tell you the type of zone that you were in. And then if you were in what we call a numbered A zone, we will tell you what the base flood elevation is. Okay? So that information will be in the note, and then we'll also tell you any other kind of funkiness that we may have sniffed out. So if we think there's a mistake on the map, or we think that the flood zone only covers a portion of the parcel, not the whole parcel, or it covers a portion of the parcel but not the building on the parcel, we will put that information in our note. Okay. And then the second thing we'll do to show that we've met the requirements of the spec, if you check Table A item 3, is we will, if your parcel is partially in a zone, we will show our best determination of the flood zone boundary. Okay, so we will actually plot that on the survey. There will be a line for the flood zone boundary with a unique line type. It'll be in the legend of the map. Okay, and we'll also label it on the map typically. Okay, so that's what I got to do. You're going to get a note on the map about the flood zone, and then if your parcel's partially covered by the zone, it's not all the way in or all the way out, we'll show the flood zone boundary on your parcel, okay, on the actual map view in the title survey. All right, so let me just go back to that language in the spec and just explain a couple things here. So I'm going to read it one more time. It says flood zone classification with proper annotation based on federal flood insurance rate maps or the state or local equivalent depicted by scaled map location and graphic plotting only. Okay, so let me explain what these different pieces mean. So flood zone classification just means they want to know the type of zone. If it's in a flood zone, they want to know what type. Is it a type A? Is it an unnumbered A? Is it an X zone, right? Is it a V zone? They want to know. Okay, with proper annotation based on the flood insurance rate map. That just means they don't want me coming up with my own terms. They want me to use the standard zone designations per FEMA, right? So if it's zone A, I can't call it zone 22 or zone type X because I want to. I have to use the standard FEMA annotations, okay? And then they say if there isn't a FEMA map, a federal flood map, but there is a state or local equivalent, I can show the zone based on the state or local equivalent. I've never personally run into that in my career. Almost every area I work in here in California does have a federal flood map. I do know that there are parts of San Francisco, California, that have not been mapped, and I have run into that before. In that particular case, I don't believe there was a state or local map that we could use as a substitute, but it may be true that there are places like that in the United States. If you're a surveyor watching this video and you have an example of that, I would love to hear about it. Shoot me an email. Okay, so we can use a state or local map if there isn't a federal map. And then the last thing is, it just says they want the flood zone shown by scaled map location and graphic plotting only. What does that mean? What that means is they know if I've got to show the flood zone boundary, it's going to be approximate. Okay, and when I make the determination about whether your parcel is in or not, that is also going to be approximate because flood maps aren't exact. Sometimes they lie. I've got another video about that. We'll put a link to it in the description here on YouTube. So this is just recognition that the surveyor can only do an approximate job of this, right? Because flood zone boundaries are not exact. It's not an exact science. Now, it may be if we think we've got a close call and the lender or the client really wants to know for sure that we have to go out and do some extra surveying work. So we may have to do what they call an elevation certificate to determine if a parcel or a building on a parcel is in or out of the zone, and we can do that. And then if we do that, we can put the information on the map based on the elevation certificate. Okay, so What you get when you check Table A Item 2 is you just get that approximate determination based on the information that's on the FEMA flood map, as good as it is, right? It's like when you check that box, the surveyor's not doing a full topographic survey and running a hydrographic model and getting a bunch of detailed building information as he or she might on an elevation certificate or a LOMA or a LOMAR. They're just pulling the map, the flood map, and trying to figure out what zone you're in. That's what that means. Okay, so now you know all about Table A. Item 3 for land title surveys has to do with floods. I would always recommend to my clients, if you are ordering a land title survey, it's a good idea to check Table A Item 3, especially if you're here in Central California where we have a lot of flood risk. And if you check Table A Item 3, now you know what your land surveyor should do to meet the requirements of the spec with that particular item checked in Table A.